All right, let's dive into the world of carbs. Those things we're always told to watch out for,
Hmm.
but can't seem to live without. We're going to figure out what they really are, what they do in our bodies, why they're both essential, A and D, potentially problematic. Our guide for this journey is a detailed academic document all about carbohydrates, so we're going straight to the source.
Yeah, I'm excited to break down the science behind these often misunderstood molecules.
So let's start with the basics. When we hear carbs, most of us think bread, pasta, maybe a sugary treat. But are those the only places we find carbohydrates?
Definitely not. Carbohydrates are actually the foundation of almost all plant-based foods. They're the energy factories of the plant world. Fruits, veggies, honey, even milk, they all contain carbs.
Interesting. So it's more than just those guilty pleasures. But what exactly a carbohydrate? I mean, scientifically speaking.
At their core, carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They come in different forms. But essentially, they provide our bodies with energy. Think of them as fuel for our cells.
Okay, so fuel for our cells. That makes sense. But I've heard there are different types of carbs, right? Like some are good and some are bad.
Well, it's more nuanced than just good and bad. Think of it like a family tree. You've got the simple sugars, the monosaccharides like glucose. That's your body's primary energy source. When you eat carbs, they ultimately get broken down into glucose to power your cells.
So glucose is like the VIP of the carb world.
Exactly. Then you have disaccharides, which are two simple sugars linked together. Sucrose, or table sugar, is a classic example. And finally, there are the complex carbs, the polysaccharides. These are long chains of simple sugars, like starch, which is how plants store energy.
Okay, so we eat starch, our bodies break it down into glucose, and we use that for energy. Sounds simple enough. But what happens to all that glucose once it's in our system?
Well, that's where things get really fascinating. It's like a carefully choreographed dance involving digestion, hormones, and a whole lot of metabolic magic.
Ooh, metabolic magic. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this digestive dance.
It all starts in your mouth. When you chew, an enzyme in your saliva starts breaking down starches into simpler sugars. Then, in your small intestine, things really get going. Enzymes from your pancreas join the party, breaking down those complex carbs even further.
So our bodies are working hard to break down these carbs into usable fuel, even before they reach our stomachs. That's impressive.
Absolutely. And once those simple sugars, mainly glucose, are released, they get absorbed into your bloodstream. Then they need to get into your cells to be used for energy.
So how do they cross the border from the bloodstream into our cells?
That's where these amazing things called glucose transporters come in. They're like tiny gatekeepers on the surface of your cells, ushering glucose from the blood into the cell where it can be used.
So glucose is in our cells, ready to be used. But how is it actually used for energy? What happens inside the cell?
That's where a process called glycolysis comes in. Think of it as a cellular power plant. It breaks down glucose into a molecule called pyruvate, and in the process, it generates ATP, the energy currency of our cells.
So when I'm running a marathon, it's glycolysis that's giving my muscles the power to keep going.
You got it. It's the process of turning those carbs into usable energy for everything, from thinking to running to simply keeping your heart beating.
Wow, so much are happening at the cellular level. But what if we have more glucose than we need at the moment? Does it just float around in our blood?
Our bodies are way too smart for that. Excess glucose gets stored away for later use. That's where glycogen comes in.
Glycogen. Remind me what that is again?
It's like our internal carbohydrate storage unit, mainly in the liver and muscles. When you have more glucose than you need right away, it gets converted into glycogen and stored for later. Then, when your blood sugar dips, like between meals or during exercise, your body breaks down glycogen to release glucose back into the bloodstream.
So it's like a backup energy reserve. Pretty cool. But I'm guessing there's a system for keeping our blood sugar levels in check, right?
Yep.
Too much or too little glucose floating around can't be a good thing.
You're absolutely right, and that's where hormones step in. It's like a delicate balancing act. And insulin and glucagon are the stars of the show.
Okay, I'm ready for the hormonal headliners. What do insulin and glucagon do?
Well, when your blood sugar rises, like after a meal, your pancreas releases insulin. Think of insulin as the key that unlocks your cells, allowing glucose to enter and be used for energy or stored as glycogen.
So insulin helps lower blood sugar by getting that glucose out of the bloodstream and into our cells.
Exactly. Now, when your blood sugar dips too low, your pancreas releases glucagon. Glucagon tells your liver to break down stored glycogen and release glucose back into the bloodstream, bringing your blood sugar back up.
So insulin lowers blood sugar and glucagon raises it, like a seesaw, keeping things balanced.
That's a great analogy. And it's crucial for maintaining stable energy levels
Yeah.
and preventing those dreaded sugar crashes. But there are other hormones involved too, like epinephrine and cortisol.
Wait, aren't those stress hormones? So stress can mess with our blood sugar levels.
You're catching on quickly. When you're stressed, your body releases these hormones, and they can raise blood sugar levels. It's part of that fight or flight response, giving you a quick energy boost to deal with whatever's stressing you out.
That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, I guess. But it also highlights how interconnected our bodies are, our emotions, our hormones, and even how we metabolize carbs.
Exactly. It's all part of the intricate web of human physiology. But here's a question for you. With all these different types of carbs and their varying effects on blood sugar, how do we know which carbs are good choices and which ones we should limit?
That's a great question. I've heard about things like the glycemic index, but I'm not really sure what that means or how to use it to make healthier carb choices.
Well, that's where we'll pick things up next time. We'll dive deeper into the glycemic index, explore the concept of glycemic load, and uncover how these tools can help you make more informed choices about the carbs you eat.
Welcome back to our deep dive into carbohydrates. Before we took a pause, we were about to unravel the mystery of the glycemic index.
Right. It sounds so scientific and a bit intimidating. Can you break it down for us? What is the glycemic index and why should we care?
It's actually a pretty simple concept. The glycemic index, or GI, measures how quickly a food raises your blood sugar level compared to pure glucose. Think of it like a ranking system for carbs.
So a high GI food sends blood sugar soaring, while a low GI food causes a more gradual rise.
Yeah, exactly. Pure glucose has a GI of 100, and other foods are ranked based on how they compare. High GI foods tend to be those processed sugary treats we talked about earlier, things like white bread, candy, and sugary drinks.
Well, so if we're trying to keep our blood sugar stable and avoid those energy crashes, low GI is the way to go.
Well, it's not always that straightforward. There's another important factor to consider, the glycemic load, or GL.
Okay, now we're getting into the advanced carb calculations. What's the difference between GI and GL?
Think of it this way. GI tells you how fast a food raises your blood sugar.
Yeah.
While GL considers both the GI and the amount of carbs in a typical serving, so a food could have a high GI, but a low GL if you don't usually eat very much of it.
Exactly. Watermelon, for example, has a high GI, but its GL is relatively low because a typical serving doesn't contain a huge amount of carbohydrates.
That makes sense. So it's really the GL that matters most when making food choices.
It's definitely a more comprehensive measure, but the good news is you don't need to memorize charts and numbers to make healthy carb choices. Focusing on whole, unprocessed foods, like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, naturally steers you towards low GI and low GL options.
That sounds much easier than becoming a carb mathematician. But you mentioned earlier that everyone metabolizes carbs differently. So doesn't that mean that GI and GL could affect people in different ways too?
You're hitting on a key point. While those general guidelines are helpful, the way your body responds to specific carbs can depend on factors like genetics, activity levels, even your gut bacteria.
Oh, right, the gut microbiome. We're learning more and more about how important it is for our overall health. How does it fit into the carb equation?
It's a fascinating connection, you see. Those trillions of bacteria living in our gut actually feed on the carbs we eat, especially fiber.
So the type of carbs we eat can actually influence the types of bacteria that thrive in our gut.
Exactly. And that's important because different bacteria have different effects on our health. Some produce beneficial compounds that help reduce inflammation and improve metabolism. Others may not be so beneficial.
So if we're not feeding the right bacteria, it could actually impact how our bodies handle carbs and potentially lead to health problems.
That's one theory researchers are exploring. It's all part of this emerging field of personalized nutrition, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to diet.
Personalized nutrition sounds like the future of health. But how can we figure out what works best for our individual bodies?
Well, there are some exciting tools emerging, like continuous glucose monitors or CGMs.
Those are the little devices people wear to track their blood sugar. I've seen athletes wearing them.
Yes, they're becoming more widely available, and they can be a game changer for understanding your individual response to carbs. You can see in real time how your blood sugar changes after eating different foods.
That's amazing. So you can actually see if that bowl of pasta spikes your blood sugar more than, say, a plate of quinoa.
Exactly. And by tracking your blood sugar over time, you can start to identify patterns and make adjustments to your diet that keep your blood sugar more stable.
It's like having a personal nutrition detective on your arm. But what about those polyols we discussed earlier? They seem to be a bit of a wild card in the carb world.
They are intriguing, aren't they? Polyols, also known as sugar alcohols, are naturally found in some fruits and vegetables, but are often used as sugar substitutes in processed foods.
Right, I've seen them on ingredient labels, but I never really understood what they were. How are they different from regular sugar?
The key difference is how they're metabolized. Unlike glucose, polyols are only partially absorbed by the body. This means they have a lower impact on blood sugar levels and contribute fewer calories.
So they're like sugar's low-key cousin. They provide sweetness without the intense blood sugar spike.
That's a great way to put it. They can be a good option for people watching their blood sugar or calorie intake. But it's worth noting that consuming large amounts of polyols can have a laxative effect, so moderation is still key.
Good to know. It seems like the world of carbohydrates is far more complex than just good carbs versus bad carbs.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the nuances of different types of carbs, their individual effects on our bodies, and finding what works best for each of us.
This deep dive is really helping me to see carbs in a new light. It's not about fearing them, but about making informed choices and tuning into our bodies. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something. We've talked a lot about glucose as the primary energy source from carbs, but what happens when our bodies need more glucose than we're consuming? Where does that extra fuel come from?
That's a great question. It takes us into the fascinating realm of protein metabolism and how our bodies can actually create glucose from other sources.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, you see, when we need more glucose than we're getting from our diet, our bodies can tap into protein. Specifically, proteins are broken down into amino acids, and some of those amino acids can be converted into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis.
Wow, so our bodies can make their own glucose from protein. That's incredible.
It is. It highlights the interconnected nature of our metabolic pathways. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all play important roles in energy production, and our bodies have intricate systems in place to ensure we have the fuel we need to thrive.
This is all so mind-blowing. It really underscores how amazing our bodies are. But I'm also wondering about the flip side of that. If our bodies can make glucose from protein, does that mean we don't technically need to eat carbs?
That's an excellent question, and one that often sparks debate. While our bodies can indeed produce glucose from other sources, carbohydrates still play a crucial role in our overall health and well-being.
So it's not about eliminating carbs altogether, but about finding that sweet spot for our individual needs.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into the frontiers of carbohydrate research, we're discovering even more fascinating insights into how these molecules interact with our bodies and influence our health.
Well, in that case, I can't wait to hear what other carb secrets we'll uncover in Part 3. We're back for the final part of our carbohydrate deep dives. I'm ready to explore those frontiers of carb research you mentioned. What groundbreaking discoveries are scientists uncovering about these essential molecules?
Well, one area that's generating a lot of buzz is the gut microbiome, that incredible community of microorganisms living in our digestive tracts.
Right, the gut microbiome. It seems to be linked to everything these days. What's the connection between our gut and the carbs we eat?
It's a fascinating interplay, you see. Those trillions of bacteria in our gut, they don't just hang out there. They actively feed on the food we consume, especially carbohydrates.
So the carbs we choose can actually impact which types of bacteria thrive in our gut.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Not all carbs are created equal when it comes to their impact on the gut microbiome.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how different carbs affect those gut microbes.
Well, think about those highly processed carbs we discussed earlier, like white bread and sugary snacks. They get absorbed quickly in the upper part of our digestive system, leaving little behind for our gut bacteria to feast on.
So those refined carbs are like a quick energy hit for US, but kind of a dead end for our gut microbes.
That's a great way to put it. But other types of carbs, particularly those rich in fiber, take a more scenic route through our digestive system. They travel further down, reaching the lower part of the gut, where the majority of our gut bacteria reside.
Ah, so fiber is like a feast for our gut bacteria.
Exactly. It acts as a prebiotic, providing nourishment for those beneficial microbes. And when those good bacteria thrive, they produce all sorts of beneficial compounds, like short-chain fatty acids.
Short-chain fatty acids, what do those do?
They're like little messengers that communicate with various systems in our body. Research is showing that they can help reduce inflammation, strengthen our immune system, and even protect against certain chronic diseases.
Wow. So by choosing the right types of carbs, we're not just fueling our bodies, but we're also supporting a healthy gut microbiome. which has all these ripple effects on our overall health.
You got it. And that's why this connection between carbs and the gut microbiome is so exciting. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for personalized nutrition.
Right. Personalized nutrition is such a hot topic these days, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on how it all works. How do we figure out which carbs are best for our unique gut microbiome?
That's the million-dollar question. Scientists are working on developing tools that can give us a clearer picture of our individual gut microbiome. There are tests that analyze the types and abundance of bacteria in our gut, kind of like a microbial census.
So we can get a personalized snapshot of our gut bacteria. That's amazing.
It is. And as this technology evolves, we'll be able to use that information to make even more targeted dietary recommendations. For example, if someone's gut microbiome is lacking in certain beneficial bacteria, we might recommend specific types of fiber or prebiotic-rich foods to help those good bugs flourish.
It's incredible to think that we can actually nurture and shape our gut microbiome through the foods we choose. This whole deep dive has been a mind-blowing exploration of the multifaceted world of carbohydrates. We've journeyed from their basic structures and functions to their intricate metabolic pathways and their fascinating connection to our gut health. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to move beyond those simplistic labels of good carbs and bad carbs. Carbohydrates are complex and play diverse roles in our bodies.
It's about appreciating the nuances and understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to carbohydrate consumption.
Exactly. It's a personalized journey of discovery, guided by an understanding of our individual needs, preferences, and increasingly, our unique gut microbiome.
So the next time we reach for a carbohydrate-rich food, whether it's a slice of whole grain bread or a bowl of berries, we can do so with a greater sense of awareness and appreciation for the intricate ways these molecules interact with our bodies.
Absolutely. It's about embracing a balanced and informed approach to enjoying the wonderful world of carbohydrates.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the fascinating realm of carbs. It's been an absolute pleasure diving deep with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Keep exploring and keep asking questions. There's always more to learn about the amazing world of food and how it shapes our health.